This last year has been a tough one, and as I'm sure is true for many, my mental health took a hard hit. I mean, things have been difficult anyway. A world under lockdown, people being oppressed, climate on the fast track to crisis. These days, anxiety seems like a pretty rational response. Mental health issues have been rising dramatically among young people around the world in the last few decades. It's a pandemic of its own, yet in my research I could find little that went beyond acknowledging the problem and calling for more treatment. For me, my well-being seemed to focus a lot around communication. Social media, news and advertising were all wearing me down. However, the opportunities to express myself, collaborate and experience other people's work through these networks gave me powerful boosts that kept me going through all of this. So I decided to research how communication can influence our brains, what effect it can have on our well-being, and how we might be able to improve our relationship with communication. In 2016, a world-leading psychologist, Yuri Hassan, ran an experiment. He investigated how our brains behave when listening to a story. Hassan discovered that brain activity in the areas linked to higher thought synchronized with that of the storyteller, calling it neural entrainment. He also found that if the same story was told to a Russian speaker in Russian, their brain activity will still match that of an English speaker who heard the story in English, showing that this phenomena relies on meaning and not just sound. Anthropologist and writer Yuval Noah Harari even argues that the formation of towns, kingdoms, and eventually nations were all possible due to our ability to communicate complex ideologies for large groups to unify under.
Storytelling is by far the best way to communicate an idea and the best way to invite people into a world that they may be unfamiliar with.
You know, art is a non-verbal thing. It's like very expressive, and I think you can often find things out about yourself that you didn't even know like were there. You know, you use it as an outlet for something completely different.
Making music benefits your mental health, as you just basically, like, it's cathartic. You're just getting things off your chest, and just a way to spend your time and pass time without doing something destructive. You're actually creating something. And listening to music, on the other hand, like, it does the same thing. So you're kind of relating to someone else's feelings and problems and stuff. And yeah, I think both sides of it is pretty beneficial.
In a talk about the power of storytelling, speaking expert David J.P. Phillips described how stories can improve your focus, motivation, and memory by inducing the production of dopamine. And this isn't the only positive effect a story can have on our brains. A sensitive, vulnerable story will induce higher levels of oxytocin, making you more generous, trusting, and open to bonding, while a funny story will release endorphins, making you more creative, relaxed, and focused. So with an unprecedented ability to communicate stories and information, we should be thriving. But it seems it's not as simple as that.
We need one.
Oh, Ramsey. My dad.
I actually went on this morning when I was younger, which I kind of feel like was a mistake, but it was when I was like really early doors with my recovery from my eating disorder. And like, I just feel like the way the press like makes stories with like sensationalism does not cater to like the nuances of mental illness. So they were like, tell us your weight at your lowest weight, and it was like all of this just like just cringe. I was so unhappy when it came out, and I was like, they need to phone me. Like, I was like, we will be speaking on the phone about this, like, because I don't know how you feel like that was productive when you sensationalize. It was like Time to Talk Day, so it was about like opening up conversations, reducing stigma, and they reported it like Sophie Anderson suffers with depression, and it was like, that's not making it normal. You make it sound like I've got two heads, like that is, and also and you misreported what illness I suffer with. Like, it's not just not good enough. And I think that it's important that we hold people to account even when they are trying, to make sure it's not tokenism and make sure it's not just performative and it actually is with good intent, instead of just because it's Time to Talk Day you want to have appeared to have had a story on.
Hassan also found that alignment is dependent on common ground. This was put to the test when two groups were told opposing single sentences about a character before hearing a story. This one sentence meant that each group opposed the other's interpretation of the story unanimously, and their brainwaves reflected this.
Hug your loved ones. Hugging is good for
If one sentence is enough to make your brain behave similarly to someone who thinks like you, and very different from anyone who doesn't think like you, think how this effect is going to be amplified in real life.
The only reason that these platforms exist, the only product they have to sell is behaviour modification. It's the capacity to change our behaviour in ways that we can't really perceive. And that's incredibly valuable. And the only way that they can do this is by gleaning, well, in Facebook's terms, I think it's something like 58,000 data points or something like that, something ridiculous like that. They know us better than we know ourselves. And I don't really think that society understands just how ruinous that is for us.
The media is such a hard thing because a lot of it is sensationalized, you know, and that really has affected me, and I'm sure it's affected a lot of people. It's so intense, and I think that's what I struggle with, and I'm sure that really affects people's mental health, because you know, it began as a way of communicating with people in a really positive environment, but it's always going to have, again, this like negative kind of thing pushing down on it now.
I think it's kind of unhealthy how much everyone communicates in a way now. Weirdly, I think especially young people, everyone is constantly in contact with each other at all times, and I personally think it's quite strange. I don't think it's actually very healthy.
Unfortunately, stories don't necessarily just produce the positive effects of dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. Cortisol and adrenaline are produced as a response to stress and make you more intolerant, irritable, uncreative, critical, impairs memory, and increases the likelihood of making bad decisions.
So this is your hoodie.
Perfect.
And your items are here. Thank you very much, man. Have a nice day.
Good one. Organic as well. Easy. EOTT. That's the crew. That's the community. I think I should start by saying that it's kind of hard for me to judge because I don't really know what life was like before the internet, so I can't really compare what like mental health was like in the 90s, for example. But I would definitely say, Instagram had a negative effect on my mental health, for sure. And again, the comparative culture that I mentioned just a minute ago, and just constantly, you know, you're very easily and quickly reminded of people's lives that are better than yours, you know, because of the highlight reel culture of Instagram.
I think social media and advertising hasn't really affected me too much. I try and just avoid it most times. So don't pay attention to it unless I'm promoting something. So I'm essentially on the other end of it. I'm advertising to people.
A lot of the people I look after have psychosis and schizophrenia and things like that. So things like advertising and TV can be quite detrimental. A lot of them don't even have a TV because if they do, they'd see like an advert and they think that advert is targeting them and they think it's someone trying to communicate to them, and then it can just like spur off their psychosis.
Physician and psychologist Dr. Posios described how that since fake news is intended to manipulate public opinion, it's designed to provoke an emotional response from the audience. It's often inflammatory in nature and can elicit feelings of anger, suspicion, anxiety, and even depression by distorting our thinking. Despite all this, I was shocked to find many academic resources blaming young people for their disorders. In 2015, a paper from the Royal College of Physicians describing how to provide holistic mental health care for young people stated that the way a young person navigates their transition into adulthood may affect current and future well-being, as well as writing that early adulthood is a time of frequently rebelling against our responsibilities. I'll let you make of that what you will. From my own experiences and knowing a lot of people who have struggled and are struggling, I'm pretty certain there's a lot more at play when it comes to rising mental health cases than young people making a few bad decisions. In fact, along this journey I found that despite everything, young people are taking the mental health pandemic into their own hands, and messages of mental health and societal change permeate the music, film, and media of our generation. Now the power of our communication network is unprecedented, the reach of its influence unknown. It might not always be used for good, but perhaps at least we can discern what forms of communication are beneficial and recognise how we can prevent communication methods that are detrimental to our well-being and mental health.
Yeah, with the label, we're just trying to put forward a positive message generally, but day-to-day living and just general human existence, I guess, is what we're trying to put forward. I guess that's our message. It's just normal life.
Do I know what I'm doing, who knows? Move from the booth to the future, it shows. Choosing to prove what I know, do what it takes and it shows.
I feel like I'm probably trying to find out parts about myself and my own mental health. And I think for so long I was, interested in art and interested in the different mediums surrounding it. But I didn't realise I was using it as my own therapeutic tool, because it's just allowed me to communicate in ways that I wasn't able to before, I think.
Try too hard to belong. Yeah, I guess we'll make it one day. Feels odd when sat on the stage. Then back on my antics again. Next day, no change.
The documentaries I want to make, they'll kind of all be about sort of social injustices and sort of problems that I see within society. So I guess you're also making that for people to spread awareness, to like sort of shine a light, I guess, on people that are in society that are being disadvantaged or sort of looked over. Yeah, so a bit of both.
Playing on stage, love trying to build till it falls and it breaks when I'm walking away.
There's lots of cool things that we've done, but definitely the most warming thing for me, or most positive thing for me, is like there have been people that have messaged saying, oh, because of that pamphlet you put out, like I actually checked up on one of my bros and like he wasn't okay, which is obviously sad, but like it was a step forward, and that for me is the main thing.
Then back on my antics again. Next day, no change. Can't sleep, so I'm free in my town. Keeping my feet on the ground. Sometimes defeated, but equally reaching for meaning that seems to be found. Need to be proud, needing a reason to change, needing a reason to stay.
For me, it is more about like the individual messages and the individual like comments and people reaching out and being like, I am experiencing this, or I'm supporting someone who is, and this is making me feel better, or thank you so much. And like that has been the most rewarding part of it. And it is something that once uni dies down in the summer, like I think it will be so nice once I can put lots of time into it and nurture it to become something that reaches, potentially more people. But for the time being, I have to just plod along because studies.
Yeah, I guess we'll make it one day. Feels odd when sat on the stage. Then back on my antics again. Next day, no change.
We do fundamentally want to understand people, and once we understand people, unless we're sociopaths, then we will empathise with them, and when we empathise with them, then we are much more likely to act on their behalf in a positive way.